Hello, Tigray press audience. Today, we have a second live interview with United States veteran diplomat, Ambassador David Shinn. We respectfully invite you to stay with us until the end of this program. We hope that you will cooperate to make this program accessible to everyone. Dear Ambassador David Shinn, welcome back to our program.
My pleasure, Bisra.
Today, we have some questions for you. The questions mainly revolve around the peace agreement between Tigray and the federal government of Ethiopia, which is being held in South Africa and Kenya. Coming to the questions, we have been hearing from various sources that America's role behind the negotiation is deep. Particularly, the negotiators from Tigray have been under a lot of pressure by the American. According to many social media reports and writers, the implementation of the South African agreement is a compromise made by coercing and shaming the Tigray negotiators. In your opinion, what kind of leverage did the United States use to achieve the South African negotiation at this speed?
Well, first, I have no doubt that what the United States made a major effort to encourage both parties, the Tigrayan side and the central government side, to take part in the negotiations in Pretoria in order to bring an end to the conflict. The United States, as I understand it, even provided transportation in one of its military aircraft for one or more of the Tigrayan participants to go to Pretoria, which I think underscores the importance that the U.S. attached to the negotiations. The obvious goal here is to bring an end to the conflict, an end to the fighting, and ultimately a resolution of all of the other issues that exist between Tigray and the central government. The actual agreement, which I have read carefully, is a very ambitious agreement in many respects. I think it's only fair to say that the Tigrayan side made more concessions and more important concessions than did the Ethiopian government side. That may be due in part to the fact that at the time the negotiations took place, it was a period when the Tigrayan defense forces were in a weakened military position. And when you are negotiating from a position of relative weakness, you obviously are disadvantaged in peace talks. And I think probably the agreement demonstrates that. As far as the role of the United States behind the scenes, I'm not privy to that. I don't know what was being said by the United States. My understanding is that the negotiations were clearly led by the African Union, particularly the former Nigerian president, the former Kenyan president, and the former South African deputy president, and that the United States was what was labeled as an observer at the talks. Now, whether the U.S. role went beyond that or not, I simply don't know. But it obviously has a great interest in the outcome of these talks, and a hope that the agreement will be implemented as agreed to. I think there is some question about that at the moment.
Ethiopia's chief negotiator, Mr. Redwan Hussein, said that the American government played a major role in the success of the negotiations. He said the following comment, and I will quote, "The American government played a vital role in persuading and pressuring the TPLF to come to the negotiations." End of quote. How do you view that?
Well, I guess I would like to hear what the other side is saying at the same time. In other words, that's a view from one side of the discussion, but it would be interesting to hear what was being said about the U.S. role from the other side, and I haven't heard that. I don't know what they're saying. It sounds to me like that is overstating the U.S. role. But again, I wasn't there, so I'm not in a position to know. He was there. He is in a position to know. On the one hand, on the other hand, is he explaining it like it actually happened? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, Mr. Red One gave, I believe, press conference to the international community in Addis. He's also an Ethiopian reporter, as you see here. Clearly, he said the American pressure the Tigrayans so that they can come to the negotiation table.
I would only add that in connection with looking at this from the standpoint of one side, the Ethiopian government side, I was reading yesterday the statement out of the Ethiopian embassy in London, which sort of lays out the government interpretation of the peace agreement. And as I read it, I had to conclude that this clearly was an interpretation where the government picks and chooses those things that favor its point of view. And I'm sure that the TPLF would do the same thing if they put out such a document. I haven't seen such a document from the TPLF. But each side is going to put the document in the most favorable light that it can to reflect the position, to reflect its position. And that's what I suspect the Ethiopian government spokesman was doing when he was speaking about the role of the U.S.
We'll move to the next question. The main reason why the war in Tigray turned into a bloody massacre and a horrible bloodbath of civilians was the leading war crimes of the Eritrean fascist forces. Although the United States has repeatedly urged the Eritrean forces to leave Ethiopia, not sure if they were serious, still now the Eritrean forces are becoming an obstacle during such a vital peace agreement. However, the negotiating team in Pretoria did not mention the Eritrean forces that are obstructing the ongoing peace agreement by invading Tigray once again and do all evil things on this planet. In your opinion, why do you think the atrocities committed by the Eritrean forces from Shiraro to Adwa and other parts of Tigray was not mentioned during the negotiation, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I've asked myself the same question. There is, as you know, a reference in, I believe it's Article 8 of the agreement, which alludes to the Eritrean presence in Tigray and indicates that it is the responsibility of the signatories to the agreement, which includes the Ethiopian government side, that all external forces are to leave the country. In my view, that means it is incumbent upon the government in Addis Ababa to ensure that the Eritrean forces, which are the only external forces I know of inside Ethiopia today, to leave and to go back to Eritrea. And if that doesn't happen, if they don't go back quickly to Eritrea, then this agreement will be a failure. There's just no way that the Tigrayan authorities can accept the continued presence, military presence of the Eritreans inside Tigray. Now, you sort of suggested that maybe the United States has not been serious over the past 2 years about the necessity of Eritrean forces to leave Ethiopia. I would certainly disagree with that. I think the United States has been very serious in its demand that the Eritrean forces leave. Unfortunately, the United States doesn't have a lot of leverage over Isaias Afwerki. He frankly doesn't much care what the U.S. position is. But the fact that the U.S. has repeatedly demanded that the Eritrean forces leave, I think, is a very serious American position.
That's an interesting response. So the Eritrean forces are killing, massacring for the second time now once they controlled Shiraro, Shirye, Aksum, Adwa. Now we heard yesterday that they reached in Ticho. Yesterday alone, they killed about 9 people, farmers. They were just attempting to do their daily duties, and they murdered them there. So if the Eritrean forces are not out of Tigray, what should be done, and what should the United States response be?
Well, first, it's not just the question of the United States and its position, it's the entire international community. Now, unfortunately, I don't have access to what's happening on the ground in Tigray, so I don't know what exactly is happening vis-a-vis the Eritrean forces in the country. I heard a totally different report several days ago that the Eritreans were still engaged militarily inside Tigray, but it's only bits and pieces that I hear in terms of what is happening on the ground. So that puts me at a real disadvantage. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the reports you have are accurate and that the Eritreans are indeed pressing forward militarily. That simply cannot continue. And I don't think the international community, if it is aware of these reports and can confirm them, will stand for it. So it's not just the role of the U.S., but it's the role of the entire international community, particularly to put pressure on the government in Addis Ababa to ensure that it upholds its side of the agreement, which says very clearly in Article 8 that the external forces, that is the Eritrean forces, even though it does not say specifically Eritrea, are to leave the country. That must happen.
About this report, let me add some other notes that has been written yesterday by the deputy spokesman of the Tigray administration, Professor Kendeya's tweet yesterday. I quote, "Killing, kidnapping, shelling around Shire and Adadaro, Tigray, continues by the Eritrean forces. There is a flock of Eritrean civilians, including women, on a looting mission, as spotted today at Shire. After curfew, they do all evil things in darkness." End of quote. As what people say, silence is consent. Do you think the IC's silence can be viewed as giving consent to the genocidal campaign?
The issue here is silence is unfortunate, but I fear that an awful lot of the difficulty in the international community is the ability to confirm these reports. And as we all know, there are no international reporters in Tigray, haven't been for quite some time. There are occasionally reports coming from non-governmental organizations or aid personnel who have some access in Tigray. But the international community is always looking for confirmation of this kind of information, and it's very hard to obtain it. I think if confirmation can be made, there will not be silence. I think the only reason for the silence is the inability to confirm the report.
Reports has been all over the map. Twitter, even international media's reporting. There is a NGO in the area, for example, in Shire and other parts of the country. There are NGOs that report what's happening on the ground. So these are valid reports that they're coming.
It's just very difficult, though, for the international community to look at the material that is in front of them when it is often being denied by the other side, and to conclude what is accurate and what is inaccurate. I realize that's very frustrating for the Tigrayan side, because to the extent these reports are accurate, awful things are being done. And the Tigrayan side would like to see all of this brought to an end, and as I would like to see it brought to an end. But it's just difficult when you're dealing in an information environment that is, I think, a little murkier than you might suggest. A lot of even the NGO reports, and I read them, sometimes are simply reporting on what they're hearing from the Tigrayan government side. So they're basically one-sided. They don't have the benefit of the other side. I have no doubt that some bad things are happening in Tigray today, continuing to happen. But exactly what's happening, I don't know, because I can't verify any of it. And I think the international community generally has got the same problem. As information is verified, then I think you're going to hear more of an outcry from the international community.
Let me play, I believe it's the British House of Commons. They talked about these atrocities in Tigray right now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate the Minister for the excellent job she's doing standing in for Foreign Secretary. There is a genocide happening in Tigray. What work is she doing with our partners in the United States, the EU and other Western countries to send a message to Prime Minister Abiy that there can be no international aid channeled through the Ethiopian government until the genocide stops? And why does he still have that Nobel Peace Prize? Is it not high time he was stripped of it?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank him for his praise? I'm not sure I'm doing that brilliantly. We are continuing to work really, really closely with our partners in the US, in the UN, and indeed I met the African P3 partners during my recent visits to New York and Washington. But really importantly, we're also supporting Obasanjo, Bankole, and President Kenyatta's efforts as well to try and bring all people to a ceasefire. Regarding a Nobel Peace Prize, that is a decision for the Nobel Committee themselves.
It's been confirmed. I believe the speaker mentioned it because he knows it's true that the Eritreans are killing, murdering Tigrayans every day. They're looting, they're murdering, they're raping. They're all evil things in this planet. And this speaker was right. There is a genocide in Tigray right now. Do we need to have more report than one or two? It's all over the Twitter, all over the medias, and the international community is talking about it. So I don't know what else we can bring to create awareness, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, Bishop, the problem is, though, that everyone that you just showed in that clip in the British Parliament basically has the same problem I have. They're not there. I'm not there, and they're not there. And they're basing this on a variety of pieces of information, some of which I'm sure are valid, some of which may not be, and coming to their own conclusions as to what exactly is happening on the ground. It's just exceedingly difficult for members of the international community to determine definitively what is happening on a day-by-day basis in Tigray, where there is not access to the international press and to the independent observers more generally. As I say, I have no doubt that some bad things are going on. Whether they're as bad as the reports indicate or not, I don't know. I literally would insist myself upon being there and observing it with my own eyes before I would make that kind of charge. Because there are some others on the other side who deny these things, as you know. Now, they may be absolutely lying, but they do deny it, and that causes confusion. I think, as unfortunately for the Tigrayans, it takes time for these pieces of information to build up to a critical mass where even members of the international community are convinced as a wider, broader group that something must be done about it, that it has now gone too far. And we're always playing catch up with this. We're never ahead of the curve in the international community. We're always behind the curve. And that's unfortunate for the people of Tigray, but unfortunately, it's a fact of life. And over time, these reports, some of them will be confirmed, and there will be a growing outcry. But in the meantime, the Tigrayans suffer.
That's true. The reason for the 360-degree siege, Tigrayan siege, is for the enemies to kill in darkness. That's why they siege Tigray. It's 2 years already. Tigray has been sieged 360 degree for 2 years, so that the enemies, the invaders, Isaias Afwerki, Abiy Ahmed, and others can kill as much as they want without the international community's knowledge. Anyways, let me move to the next question. The military commanders' peace agreement, which was due to expire on Monday, has been extended to Wednesday, and from Wednesday to Friday again. But we hope it will be done today. What do you think they couldn't agree on? Do you think everything is in shape now?
Well, no, everything is clearly not in shape now, and that's one of the reasons you've had the extension of these talks in Nairobi between the military commanders. Clearly, it has not been an easy discussion, and it remains to be seen whether it's going to end well or not. I do think that the discussions between the military commanders are frankly probably more useful than those between the political leaders. I think the military commanders are somewhat more better positioned to speak to the problems and bringing the problems to an end than the political leaders are. It's the military commanders who are experiencing the death on a day in, day out basis, much more so than the political leaders who are several steps removed from the killing on the ground. The military leaders understand that what they are doing is critical to the lives of people on both sides, and I think are just more attuned to trying to come up with a solution for ending this conflict. But they certainly have their work cut out for them, and I'm hopeful that they will reach some kind of an agreement that will allow the killing to come to an end, which it obviously has not yet. And I think it also is going to put added pressure on the Eritreans leaving Tigray, leaving Ethiopia, if these talks in Nairobi are not successful. Then it will be exposed that this is simply not working and that something else has to be done. I think the pressure will grow in the international community to remove the Eritrean forces from Tigray.
But don't you think the agreement between the two negotiating military commanders in South Africa and Kenya will invite another round of bloody massacres, as there is no international monitoring group, and the negotiation efforts are biased towards the invading forces and intends to alienate the Tigrayan negotiators, and the balance has not been maintained?
Well, you make a good point that there are no international observers in Tigray, and these kinds of conflicts, you often do have international observers, and that helps a great deal to ensure that the agreements are complied with. We don't have that in this case, and that's unfortunate. So it is entirely based upon the willingness of both sides to comply with the agreement. And if one or both sides are not willing to comply with the agreement, the agreement obviously fails at that point. And then one goes back to the conflict, to the fighting, which is, in my view, not in the interest of anyone. But nevertheless, that's the reality of the situation. So one has to assume, for the sake of argument, that both sides are willing to implement the agreement. And that means, among other things, that the Eritrean forces have to leave, because that was part of the agreement.
But they haven't mentioned during the negotiation that Eritreans are still in Tigray, invading, killing, looting, massacring. and they have to leave. Why don't they mention that the Eritrean forces are killing innocent civilians, innocent women and children in Tigray? I'm just wondering why they didn't mention that.
We've got to be. I think we have to be careful in terms of describing the actual negotiations. When they were going forward in Pretoria, they were done in great secrecy. I didn't hear, and you didn't hear what was being said there. None of us heard. In fact, it was a phenomenal success, in my view, that they were able to do that in such secrecy. It's very unusual for discussions like that to be held so closely. And essentially, the same thing is happening in Nairobi. I'm not hearing, and you're not hearing, who is saying what to whom in Nairobi. I can't imagine that the Tigrayan side is not yelling and screaming and pounding on the table about ongoing violations of the agreement in Tigray. I'm sure they are, just as the Addis Ababa side is, I'm sure, complaining about something else that isn't moving forward in its view. So we have to be careful about trying to judge what is happening in the actual negotiations. Unless we're sitting in the room listening, we don't know.
But looking at the documents they signed, there were like 14, 12 pages. In any of this, did not mention the Eritrean invading forces are in Tigray. They just, in general, said any foreign interference. I believe that's what it says. It does not say the Eritrean government, the Eritrean troops clearly invaded Tigray and invaded about 3 districts, Aksum, Shire, Adwa, and killing innocent children and civilians every day. Don't you expect to see some sort of Eritrean invasion in those documents?
No, I found it curious that Eritrea was not mentioned in the peace agreement. But as I said earlier, clearly they were referring to Eritrea in Article 8, whereby all external forces were to leave the country, and the only external force in Ethiopia today is the Eritrean force. So in my view, it was clearly a reference to Eritrea. Why it did not say Eritrea specifically, I have no idea. I wasn't sitting in the room in Pretoria, and I don't know who it was that decided to leave it out. Obviously, both sides agreed to it, or it would not have been written that way in the final agreement. But eventually, I suppose we'll hear why it was written that way. But I'm not the one to be able to explain it at this point in time.
As the international community knows it, the Eritrean and Amhara invading forces, as well as the Ethiopian Federal Forces, carried out ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity in Tigray. While it is regrettable that those 3 criminal forces have not been prosecuted so far, why do you think such war crimes and crimes against humanity have not even been mentioned during the peace agreement in Nairobi and Pretoria?
Quite frankly, I think they weren't mentioned because it's in what we call the too hard box. In other words, there are certain things that you try to deal with that are of a more immediate priority, that is stopping the conflict, basically. And if you can get that done as a first step, you can move on to the accountability issues later on. You're quite right. Accountability was not raised anywhere in the agreement. This was an obvious omission, but I'm sure it was done on purpose because it was just thought to be too hard to deal with at this early stage of the talks. I think there will be growing pressure. I know there's growing pressure from Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch to put pressure on all parties, including the international community, to insist upon accountability for all atrocities in Ethiopia. And even though the Tigrayans took the brunt of it, as you know, there were allegations against some Tigrayan incidents also that took place earlier on. And all of these have to be brought to account. I don't know, quite frankly, whether they will be over the future months and years or not. I think there will be an effort to insist upon accountability, but it's always hard to go back over time and bring to account those who are responsible for war crimes or ethnic cleansing or whatever. I mean, we saw that in Rwanda, how difficult it was to bring people to account. We've seen it around the world over the years, and hopefully it will be done. But history does not lend itself to a strong argument here.
More than a week after the signing of the agreement, humanitarian aid still has not been able to enter Tigray. As we speak, hundreds of people are dying in Tigray. Right after the signing of the agreement, there was a drone attack on different places of Tigray. According to some scholars in the diaspora, the main purpose of the negotiations is to clock the victory that the invaders did not get in the battlefield in the name of peace. They say that it is the extension of the 2 years genocidal campaign. What is your view on such comment, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, clearly a key part of the peace agreement was to resume the distribution of emergency assistance, of food aid, etc., medical supplies to Tigray. And you're right, it has not resumed yet. We're, about 8 days, I guess, 8 or 9 days since the agreement was signed. If there continue to be delays in the resumption of aid going into Tigray, I think this will result in an outrage by the international community. This should be an easy thing to do. Things like disarmament of the Tigrayan forces and getting the Eritrean forces out of Tigray are hard to do. They've got to, they're part of the agreement. They need to be done, but they're hard. Resuming humanitarian assistance and resuming services in Tigray is not that hard. And if there are further delays on that, there's going to be, I think, quite a negative response from the international community.
Until now, the leaders of Tigray have not come out in the media and given a statement to their people and supporters. Some people say that the main reason why they were not given this opportunity is that the signing of the agreement was kept secret. Why do you think it was kept secret?
One can make an argument that negotiating in secret is a good thing rather than a bad thing, because if you basically have a press conference after each day's negotiation, you normally complicate the ability to sign an agreement. I think past experience shows that. So I don't see any problem with keeping the discussions secret. I am intrigued that so little has been said by the Tigrayan side in the aftermath of the signing of the agreement. I haven't seen much of anything at all being announced by the Tigrayan side. In Addis Ababa, we are seeing more being said, being published about it, but not out of Mekelle. And I don't know the reason for that. You're better in a better position to answer that question than I am. You have better contacts, obviously, in the Tigrayan community than I do. So I should be asking you that question, not you asking me.
No more contacts from Tigray, Mr. Ambassador. As you know, Tigray has been sieged 360 degrees. There is no telecom, there is no internet, there is no transportation system. There is no phone. All has been dismantled by the Eritrean and the Ethiopian and Amhara forces. I cannot have contacts from Tigray. That's the number one or number two reasons that we can't sleep. Some say that this agreement is not for lasting peace, but for fake agreement. because the Eritrean invading forces, which are the main engineers of the bloody war, especially now when the people of Tigray are being massacred, why are the Tigrayan people asked to disarm themselves to the point that they cannot even defend themselves before the Eritrean invading forces leaves Tigray? How can such injustice bring peace and stability to the region?
Well, I mean, clearly, I cannot imagine that the Tigrayan Defense Forces are going to disarm before the Eritreans leave the country. It would be suicidal, quite frankly, to do that. So I just don't see that happening. The Eritreans clearly have to leave, and it's up to the government of Ethiopia to insist that that happen. They signed the agreement in Addis Ababa, and that was one of the terms of the agreement, even though Eritrea is not mentioned specifically in the agreement. But that is obviously the reference in Article 8. So, as I've said many times, the agreement fails if that does not happen, and happen quickly.
And how is this agreement be achieved without the Eritreans leave Tigray? Actually, Isaias Afwerki declared that the Eritrean troops stay in Tigray just the day before yesterday.
Well, I didn't hear the statement by President Afwerki, so I don't know exactly what he said, but the agreement doesn't work if that happens. If the Eritreans stay, the agreement is dead at that point.
So what's the solution then?
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid the immediate solution is one returns to the fighting, as sad as that might be. I have no idea what the international community does at that point in time. I've said from the beginning that there's no interest in the international community to send troops into the Horn of Africa to deal with this issue, and that's still the position that I see happening from the international side. But a return to fighting is not in the interest of either side, in my view, and certainly not in the interest of the Tigrayan civilians who are going to be horribly hurt by such a decision. So I'm still hopeful that it's possible to implement the terms of the agreement, and with each passing day, that's looking more and more difficult.
Do you think the ICE will just let these parties kill one another and for another round of bloodshed?
Well, there will be efforts taken to try to tamp down the conflict, and whether they will be successful or not is, I think, highly questionable. They haven't been successful so far over the past 2 years, other than this agreement signed in Pretoria. But it remains to be seen if this agreement's going to hold up.
Well, some scholars say this. Before a party can enter into a peace agreement, there should be a cessation of hostilities, then a ceasefire, and finally a political settlement. These steps were not followed for the negotiations to be effective, and there is no enforcement mechanisms towards its implementation. Are you hopeful this will work?
Well, you use the term cessation of hostility and ceasefire. I sort of interpret those as being one and the same. I'm not sure what the distinction is between the two terms, but you're right. Cessation of hostility, ceasefire, that is the first step. And usually there is some provision for ensuring, either through international monitors or whatever, that these are implemented. We don't have that in this case. That is unfortunate, but you basically have to deal with what the negotiators are willing to accept, and what they were willing to accept is what we have seen in the publicly announced agreement, unless there were other secret side deals that we don't know about. That's always a possibility. it would obviously be better if there were more teeth in the agreement than there are. But it is what it is at this point. And I think that both sides have to try to make it work. And it remains to be seen if that's going to happen.
Many commentators reflect that the former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo and the African Union Chairman Musa Faki, they do not trust these two individuals because they were absolutely biased with the Ethiopian government, particularly with Abiy Ahmed. Do you think these two individuals will do something tangible?
Well, I've heard some of the complaints from the Tigrayan side concerning former President Obasanjo. And it was my understanding that one of the reasons that the Tigrayans wanted former President Kenyatta to be involved is that they saw him to some extent offsetting the views of Obasanjo. But I've also heard that people were on both sides were generally pleased with the way that Obasanjo and Kenyatta and the South African deputy president handled the discussions in Pretoria. And again, since I wasn't there, I have no way of judging what any of them said. And I would be reluctant to be critical of any of those three individuals without actually having been in the room and heard what they said. I think all three were acting in good faith and were trying to do the best they could to come up with a solution to this very unfortunate conflict.
Abiy, Isaias, and the Amhara forces unleashed their weapons and massacred the people of Tigray, accompanied by the United Arab Emirates drones. In your view, why do you think the United States chose to remain silent 2 years ago?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with you that the United States remained silent. In fact, the United States was being constantly criticized by Abiy Ahmed for not supporting the government's position on the conflict in Tigray. The United States was singled out by the government of Ethiopia's side as being pro-Tigrayan and as being too critical of what the government was trying to do in Tigray. So it's the old problem. If you're the United States, you get criticized by both sides. You can never please anyone. I saw this during my foreign service career, and particularly saw it in Ethiopia during the Eritrean-Ethiopian War, where both Meles Zenawi and Isaias Afwerki were constantly criticizing the United States because we were perceived as supporting the other side, depending upon whether you were in Eritrea or Ethiopia. I'm afraid this is a feature that a world power simply has to suffer.
I'm almost finishing my questions. I'm going to ask you some interesting question. If you were Joe Biden today, what would have you done to solve all problems in Ethiopia?
There were some occasions over the last 2 years where I wish that the president had simply engaged more actively in the conflicts for that matter, because we're only talking about Tigray, but let's not forget there are other issues in Ethiopia today than just Tigray. But there were occasions over the last 2 years where I wish he had been more personally active in dealing with the issue. Now, I say that knowing full well that he's got dozens of issues that he's grappling with on any given day, not the least of which have been more recently in the Ukraine, but many, many issues. And there are limits to a president's time and attention. But I think that there could have been occasions when he personally would have been engaged to a greater extent. Now, he has had one or more conversations with Abiy Ahmed about the situation in Tigray. But I would have liked to have seen more. That's really about all I can say. And there may have been things that have been done that I'm not aware of. In fact, I'm sure that there have been things done. The United States appointed 3 different envoys for the Horn of Africa to deal primarily with a situation in Ethiopia. Now, you can argue, my goodness, 3 different envoys over the course of 2 years, that's unfortunate. Yeah, it would have been better if it had only been 1 envoy, and the same envoy from the beginning, or just only a need to do 1. When you have 3, you obviously confuse the issue. But that's a fact of life and diplomacy, and that's what happened. So we were presented with 3 different individuals, which means 3 people having to be educated on the problem, gear up and understand it, and you lose a lot when that happens. But the administration was trying its best, and it did at least nominate someone, a new person after the first and the second persons resigned. But it would have been a lot better if there could have been just 1 person.
After all these tragedies, what's the future fate of Tigray in Ethiopia, do you believe, Mr. Ambassador?
I wish I knew. I don't know. I have argued from the beginning, and I know a number of Tigrayans disagree with me on this, but I have argued that I would like to see Tigray be able to stay within a unified Ethiopia. Now, how the political situation looks in Tigray is up to the Tigrayan people and up to the central government in Addis Ababa. It may look rather different than it has in the past. And I realize that there are some Tigrayans who would rather have an independent Tigray. That's not a concept that I agree with, but of course it's not for me to say. It's up to Ethiopians and Tigrayans to decide what their future is. But I think that once you have one major ethnic group breaking away from Ethiopia, then you start to have the unraveling of the entire country to the point where you have a whole series of mostly non-viable independent countries, landlocked country, all of them landlocked countries. And that I don't think is a good outcome. But there has to be some future arrangement, assuming that Tigray remains part of a united Ethiopia, for meeting the concerns that Tigrayans have, and for that matter, the concerns that Oromo have, or the people in Benishangul have, or any of the Somalis. All of these concerns have to be taken into account, which may have to be done through some sort of a national political dialogue.
If husband and wife are about to kill one another, don't you think it's better for them to be separated?
I'm sorry, to be which?
Separated. Divorce.
Interesting question. No, I think it's better if they're about to kill each other to rather step back and talk through it and find a way out of it, rather than go ahead with a killing.
Yeah, that's what exactly is happening in Ethiopia. Tigrayans and the regime, not all Ethiopians are our enemies. Some within the government are attempting to eradicate us from the face of the earth. So instead of killing one another, shouldn't we be divorced or independent?
There are a lot of good Ethiopians too who don't want that to happen in Tigray. I'm not talking about Tigrayans. I'm talking about non-Tigrayans who don't want that to happen, who don't want Tigrayans eliminated. I mean, I know lots of Ethiopians.
I agree.
And there are a lot of good people out there. And I think we have to rely, we have to hope that the better angels will prevail in Ethiopia, and that will be by far a majority position of the Ethiopian populace.
Mr. Ambassador, many Ethiopians, Tigrayans, Eritreans appreciate you that you come to our media and give us your good experience. And I want to tell you that many of us like you a lot. When we are in trouble, you are here to speak with us and to consult with us. And we really appreciate your presence today and always. Do you have any suggestions at last that you want to add?
No, I've pretty much said everything I think that I can say up to this point. I do wish that I had more faster, reliable information coming from the ground in Tigray, which I don't have because I just don't have those kinds of contacts anymore. I also hope that, as I said before, that the better angels will prevail in Ethiopia, that somehow this agreement can be made to end the killing, and from that point afterwards, it will be possible to work out something that will be acceptable to not only the Tigrayan people, but the broader Ethiopian community, so that it's possible to knit back together again an Ethiopia that is unified and is working for the benefit of all the people of Ethiopia.
United States veteran diplomat Ambassador David Shinn, we really appreciate your presence today, and thank you so much, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Bisra.